I know there wasn't much description of Melchizedek, but he was given importance compared.
Let me know when you're ready.
Ready?
Okay. Hey, so the question that Kelly has is, who is Melchizedek? And the reason that question came about is because we were in Genesis chapter 14. We are studying every Wednesday the life of Abraham. And in Genesis 14, the most recent lesson, it says that Abraham encountered a king, Genesis chapter 14, verse 20, encountered a king whose name is Melchizedek. And the Genesis writer describes him to us as king, Genesis chapter 14, verse 20. He is 18 and 18, 20. He is king of Salem, and he was the priest
of God Most High.
And a few thoughts there, immediately you go, normally a king is only a king and a priest is normally a priest. During that time, there could not be a king and a priest. So, and then the fact that he blesses Abraham, and a pronunciation of that blessing could only come from one who is intimate with God. Because verse 19 and 20 says, "Blessed be Abraham by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth." This priest must know who really God is. Right? So not only that, verse 20, "And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hands." So this God also understands the kind of future Abraham will have. So this is a priest or a high priest that knows God. This is a high priest that knows the future of what God's going to do. All right, which is incredibly not found. It's only found on certain priests. Okay, because priests are limited. This one is not. And then what was Abraham's response to him in verse 20? You want to read that, Kono? Genesis 14, verse 20. We're asking, who is Melchizedek? That is Kelly's question. And we already said he is the priest. He is the high priest. He knows God. He knows the future of what God's going to do to Abraham. And how did Abraham respond to him? Verse 20, the last phrase.
"And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand."
Continue. Then.
Abraham gave him.
So all of a sudden now Abraham respond to him just the way Abraham would respond to God. Who do you give your 10% to? Who do you give your tithe to? Right? So the whole idea there is, all of a sudden, Abraham understood that this is not just a king who blessed him, and then blessed him with pronunciation, what's going to happen to him today and tomorrow. He's not just a high priest, but he is one worthy of receiving worship from people. Because Abraham worshipped him and gave him the tenth. Now the question, of course, that we're going to have to ask is, who appropriately receives worship and receives the tenth or the offering of people? Who appropriately receives those?
The priests.
The angels denied those. Even the apostle, when they were worshipped, said, "Don't worship us." So who deserves worship? God. Who deserves receiving our gifts? God. Abraham worships Melchizedek. He gives him his 10%. Immediately you go, this must be more than just a king and a priest. And then now we turn to Hebrews. We would not know the true character and personhood of Melchizedek until the Hebrew writer explains why Jesus is greater than everyone else. Chapter 5, and Kelly, which verse is that? Verse 5 and verse 6. Okay, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 5 and verse 6. Kelly will read to us.
"In the same way, Christ did not take on himself the glory of becoming a high priest, but God said to him, 'You are my son today, I have become your father.' And he says in another place, 'You are a priest forever in the order of Melchizedek.'"
You know, verse 5 and verse 6 of the book of Hebrews, chapter 5, is one of those paradoxical, because at one point he says he's not like this, but on another, which is the next verse, he says, "Oh, but he is better than that." Right, in verse 5, the writer says, he is not a high priest. He did not come as a high priest because he was a servant. Then in verse 6 it says, oh, but he's better than a priest. He's better than the high priest because he is a priest in the order of Melchizedek. And the only tone that you have about Melchizedek is Genesis chapter 14. Now, the New Testament writer says, this Melchizedek is what, in the order of Melchizedek is what made Jesus better than everything. Angels and beings and creation, he is better because he is from the order of Melchizedek. And how did we find Melchizedek in the Old Testament? He is king, he is priest, he is receiving worship, and he is receiving offerings and tithes. And if Jesus is in the order of Melchizedek, and Jesus is God, and Jesus is human, and Jesus is God, what the Hebrew writer is saying is the assumption that Melchizedek is Jesus himself. That makes sense? And that's one interpretation that you can be safe to say that, because that is a character of Jesus. He is the anthropomorphic expression of God, or the theophany of God. Theophany of God. Okay. So once more, Melchizedek. If Melchizedek in
Where
Genesis
did it says that
chapter 14,
he receives worship?
yeah.
Where does it say?
Let me say that again. If in Genesis chapter 14, verse 19 says he is king, and he is priest or high priest of God, and in verse 20 he is able to give blessing, he gives blessing, and he foretells future. And then in the bottom of verse 20, he received received the offering that rightly belongs to whom? Who do you get the 10% to? To God. So he received worship. And that's what we're trying to imply here. That this guy in Genesis 14 has all the criteria of, fast forward, Hebrews chapter 6. Oh, 5, I'm sorry, Hebrews chapter 5. Where it says that Jesus came, not as a high priest, but a servant, verse 14.
5.
Chapter 5, verse
5.
Verse 5.
Yeah, 5 to
6.
5 and 6. And then in verse 6 it says, but Jesus is the high priest, or the priest after the order of Melchizedek, which is Jesus, which is pointing back there. And to be a high priest in the order of Melchizedek is to say that he is a high priest like Melchizedek, not Aaron, not Levi, okay, not Moses, not Abraham, but Melchizedek. And then now we have to ask the question, who is Melchizedek, right? And we say this is Melchizedek, which is properly fitting to the description of Jesus, because Jesus is king, Jesus is priest, Jesus gives blessing, Jesus tells the future, Jesus receives offering, and Jesus receives worship. So we're just gonna extend it to another interpretation to say, and most likely this Melchizedek of the Old Testament that we have a question mark with, we can say that he is the theophany of God. What is theophany? Theo came from the word theology. Theo means God. Theology, the study of God. So far, funny is not like funny, comedy, but phaneo meaning to a morph or an expression. So this is the form of. So the Greek word there is, this Melchizedek is a form of God in the Old Testament. Which, by the way, There are many theophany in the Old Testament, like Moses. He saw the burning bush. What did he do in the burning bush? What was the story in the burning bush? He comes, he sees it, and then what does the voice say in the burning bush? Moses, take off your sandals. Why? Because you are in a holy mountain of God. What makes the mountain holy? God, the presence of God. Where was the presence of God? Where was the voice coming from? From the bush. So where's God at that moment, at that time? In the bush. That is a theophany, a form and manifestation of God. And because God's a God in John chapter 4 verse 24, because John 4:24, because God is a spirit, he could not have a physical manifestation. But Jesus in John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Word became flesh, verse 3. He had a physical manifestation. That's why we say that every time there is a physical manifestation in the Old Testament, we are always confident to say that is a theophany and that is Jesus. The burning bush is most likely Jesus in the form of the burning bush. Okay. The general from which Joshua fell down in Joshua chapter, I forget now. Are you for us or are you against us?
Oh, Joshua.
Yeah, to Joshua or to Gideon? Joshua. Joshua. And he said, neither, because I am not from the army, but I am from the army of the Most High God. And what did Joshua do? He fell down and he worshipped. And that being did not even say, don't worship. The reason is because he's a theophany. And most likely, just as Jesus is a theophany in the Old Testament, like Melchizedek, he's a theophany during the time of Joshua. Okay? Make sense? What do you think, Kelly?
Thank you.
Yeah? Gave you deeper appreciation of Melchizedek, yeah? And you think on Wednesday night we're just playing around watching and learning about Abraham. But boy, well, are we not looking at some foundational theology that is not even explained? Because Genesis chapter 14 is a story. It's not saying, okay, point number 1, this is God, point number 2. No, there was no explanation there. It's simply an assumptive story that tells us that this is norm. And what was happening in Genesis 14 was a normal thing, right? Abraham fought the kings of the Middle East people, and then Abraham came back and he saw the king of Salem. Okay, good. All right. Good question, Kelly. All right, next one, Miss Carol. Your turn. By the way, we are taking questions right now. Go ahead and call 1-800. Oh, never mind.
567.
They have a lot of questions
All right,
on there.
forget it.
Karen Bono has 2 questions.
Okay, all right. I'd like to start it off. Wait, Miss
Karen.
Kelly started it off already. So.
Karen, your question.
What's your question?
My question is, when someone commits suicide, do they go to heaven or do they go to hell?
It's a good question. So let's look at some foundations first of how to get to heaven. Okay. So we go to Romans chapter 8. Romans chapter 8.